afternoon. I'm Faith De Los Reyes. I'm Research and Project Coordinator at the Human Rights Resource Center. And I will be presenting some key findings of our synthesis report of our latest study, Keeping the Faith, a study of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion in ASEAN. As Abby mentioned earlier, our paper, as our study, is inspired by Article 22 of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, which states that every person has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. All forms of intolerance, discrimination, and incitement of hatred based on religion and beliefs shall be eliminated. So when we saw this, we said that this is a commendable aspiration, because if you look at international instruments, a lot of legal substantive norms arise from the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which states that everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right shall include freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice, and freedom either individually or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. But if you recall, as we all know, we are very careful about signing on to international instruments. So with regard to the ICCPR, only 6 countries out of 10 ASEAN countries signed on to this. This includes Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. We also have other instruments that relate to freedom of religion. However, as you can see on the screen, not all of these conventions or instruments are signed by all ASEAN member states. The only instruments that all ASEAN countries signed are the CEDAW and the CRC, or the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. But even then, there are some countries that made reservations on the basis of freedom of religion. For instance, Malaysia and Brunei, when they signed on to these 2 documents, they said that this is with reservation to provisions that are contrary to the principles or beliefs of Islam. In the case of Singapore, when it signed the CRC and the CEDAW, it said that we signed this, but the implementation will be in accordance with values, customs, and beliefs of Singapore's multicultural, multiracial, and multi-religious society. So given how careful we are with our international commitments, we thought that let's look at how ASEAN countries are actually taking this commitment in the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration to eliminate tolerance, intolerance, discrimination, and incitement of hatred. Let's see how far we are from achieving this aspiration. And so the study, which Abby mentioned, is comprised of 10 country reports, and a synthesis report looks at the legislative and policy framework of each country. So we look at the country's international commitments, its constitution, and the laws it has passed pertaining to freedom of religion and belief. And then we also look at trends in practice. We look at the frequency of religious persecution. We look at how states respond to these communal conflicts or persecution of freedom of religious groups, and then we look at how it affects neighboring countries. And then we also look at factors that contribute to the issue of freedom of religion in these countries. And with these 10 country reports, we produced a synthesis report that highlights the key observations that are gathered from the country reports. Moving on to the key findings, the overview of state-religion relationship in ASEAN. We know that freedom of religion is an important commitment for ASEAN member states. It is legally guaranteed in all constitutions with the exception of Brunei Darussalam. So if you look at the screen in front of us, you will see that most of the countries state protection for freedom of religion very strongly. It is described as a right, something that people should be allowed to practice. But if you look at Brunei Darussalam, it merely states that the official religion of Brunei Darussalam shall be the Islamic religion, and all other religions may be practiced in peace and harmony with Islam. So if you convert that to Indonesia, you use the word guarantee. With regard to declared state-religion relationship, we noted that 5 countries out of 10 ASEAN member states have a preference in their constitution for a particular religion. So, in the case of Brunei Darussalam, Cambodia, and Malaysia, they outrightly provide for a state religion. For Brunei, it's Islam. For Cambodia, it's Buddhism. For Malaysia, it's also Islam. With regard to Myanmar and Thailand, there is also a clear preference for Buddhism, but it does not come out right to say that Buddhism is a state religion. Instead, it merely says that we recognize the special position of Buddhism because it's the religion practiced by most people. Indonesia does not name a particular religion, but it does have a preference for monotheistic belief, and that it says that the state shall be based upon the belief in the one and only God. Laos, PDR, Singapore, and Vietnam do not provide for, do not declare a state-religion relationship in their constitution. What we notice is that usually these countries would allow people to practice their faith as long as it does not interfere with harmony or it does not come in conflict with state interest. The Philippines is the only country in ASEAN that provides for a complete separation of church and state. We think that it's important to highlight these differences because it can explain how countries respond to issues or why they issue the policies that they do or why they implement the practices that are being practiced in their countries. The study found that there are some significant trends in communal conflict based on religion or religious persecution across ASEAN. We noted that this is most concerning in Malaysia, Brunei, Myanmar, and unfortunately also Indonesia. With regard to Malaysia, we noted that there has been a notable increase in violent persecution of dissenters and minorities within Islam. This is most prominent in the fact that Muslims who wish to convert out can be detained for rehabilitation. In fact, in one of the states, in Terengganu, there is even a law that says that converting out of Islam is a crime that is punishable by death. Although this law is not being imposed because its constitutionality is being questioned. Also, with regard to groups whose beliefs are not clearly aligned with Sunni, which is the religion that is embraced by a majority of the people in Malaysia, there has also been prosecution of these groups for deviant teachings. For instance, this includes the Al-Arqam and the Sky Kingdom, the cult of the Sky Kingdom. There has also been persecution of Shia Muslims through harassment and detention. We also know that non-Muslim religious minorities were also being subjected to symbolic violence in the form of destruction of their places of worship. So the report found that from 2004 to 2014, around 6 churches were demolished by local governments. There have also been demolition of some very old Hindu temples, Hindu kandis, including one that's as old as 1,200 years, on the basis that it did not have the required permit from the government. So the report found that this is quite curious because if you talk about 1,200 years back, the Malaysian state was not even there. So who would have issued a permit to that for the construction of that kandi? And also, if we could recall that last year there were a lot of conflicts after the High Court issued a ruling saying that the Herald newsletter, they could use the word Allah in their publication. So this gave rise to attacks of churches especially. There were burning of some churches, there were slashing of paints of some churches, and also there were some reports of pig heads being thrown into mosques. We then move on to Myanmar. Significantly after the democratization in 2011, we noted a rise of violent persecutions against Muslims. And I would just like to point out that although in the news it's always we hear about the Rohingyas, but other Muslim groups have also been subjected to persecution. But talking about the Rohingya, who are actually numerically majority in Rakhine State, but are politically a minority because their citizenship is in question. So they're not given citizenship rights. As in effect, they have they lack the right to citizenship. Their freedom of movement is restricted. There are obstacles to family development. There's confiscations of land. There's forced labor. There's arbitrary taxation, and there's exclusion from the local economy. So while the government has said that it's something that's occurring because the communities are going against each other, and we cannot really say who started it and who's at fault, but the report argues that the government has failed or neglected to protect Muslim minority from widespread violence, so it has become complicit to these violent persecutions. Moving on to Indonesia, and I'm sure Pak Zain can speak more about this later, we noted that we noted the case of the Ahmadiyya Muslims, and there have been calls for them to be declared outside of Islam and for them to be banned. There have been attacks on mosques and other properties owned by the Ahmadiyya community. We also noted violent persecution against Shia Muslims, where it was noted that the last attack against the Shia community, one Shia follower was killed and 30 houses were burned down. Other groups are also persecuted to a lesser extent. This includes the Aliran Kepercayaan and Christians, as well as other Muslim groups that are not aligned with the majority. Lastly, we also noted the case of Brunei. We noted that in Brunei, there are no examples of religious persecution. There are no examples of communal violence. But then, this could be because the state has absolute control of power. And this has led to a general lack of political or civic space for dissent. We also know that there are systemic state surveillance of non-Muslim groups. And lastly, we highlight Brunei because of the the challenge that could be posed by the Sharia Penal Code Order 2013, because it imposes significant restrictions on the religious freedom of Muslims as well as non-Muslims. So, for instance, the law, the provision on blasphemy provides that for both Muslims and non-Muslims found to have insulted the Prophet could be sentenced to death, or alternatively to a maximum of 30 years imprisonment and 40 strokes if they do not repent. Also, apostasy is outlawed and punishable by death by stoning. Finally, sexual conduct such as extramarital sex, homosexual intercourse, sexual intercourse against the order of nature is criminalized and is punishable by death by stoning. And so from these findings, we highlighted also the factors that influence persecution or discrimination. The first of this, which we think is the most important, is politicization of religion. Many of the country reports note a worrying trend of politicization of religion in the ASEAN region, and highlight that this has led to an increase in religious persecution and conflict. In particular, this is extensively noted in Malaysia, Myanmar, and to some degree in Indonesia. Religion is politicized when it is invoked in political discourse for political aims. Religion is an important identity marker for ASEAN people, and politicians have found it convenient to use religion or to exploit religion to gain legitimacy, to gain votes, to gain approval, or to destroy their opponent, or to discredit their opponent. Another side effect of politicization of religion is that candidates or politicians find it politically expedient not to criticize extremist views. We also put emphasis on ethno-religious nationalism. Ethno-religious nationalism has been defined as a social movement that claims to speak in the name of the nation and which defines that nation in terms of religion. And so religious nationalists invoke religious identity to mobilize followers to gain political support and oppose other religious groups. They seek to sharpen the boundary of religious political community, and this tends to spread a high level of political animosity to those perceived to be outside the nation. So a religious dissenter, therefore, is not only a person of another religion, but you become something like a national traitor. And so we noted this to be a worrying concern in Malaysia and also in Myanmar with the Mada, an organization that's pushing for laws pertaining to restrict interreligious marriage, to pass laws against conversion, and even in extreme circumstances, inciting violence against religious communities. Lastly, we highlight weak rule of law. The strength or weakness of the rule of law of a country can also contribute to religious persecution and conflict. For instance, a state with a breakdown of the rule of law could open up space for religious extremism. This has generally arisen in the wake of democratization following a sustained period of authoritarianism. So we see this now in Myanmar, where after the 2011 democratization, government is not anymore as in control as it was before, and the way it responds to issues, it cannot anymore resort to their old ways of just going out and punishing everybody and putting them in jail. And so also we can see this also after the Reformasi, perhaps, where there is a weakening of state power, and this has allowed extremist views to proliferate. Also, we noted in this regard, in regard to rule of law, unequal application of the law being a contributor to religious persecution and discrimination. For instance, in Indonesia, with regard to decentralization, while decentralization is generally good because it gives local governments the power to respond to issues that they identify in solutions that they think are most effective, but it can be a double-edged sword because local communities may pass laws or implement policies or practices that favor only the religious majority in that area. Also, local authorities may be unable or unwilling to protect the rights of religious minorities. We have 15 minutes, but I just wanted to say that if you look at the handouts, at the last pages, I include some good practices. So while I will not have time to go over them, I just want to point out that while it's mostly not good, there are some still good practices in ASEAN. So thank you very much.